So let's look at how this bombshell text message from Jonathan Majors and Grace Jabbari has moved through the courtroom and the court of public opinion. The admissibility. Now, why did it suddenly come into play on Friday? Well, those text messages were part of a packet of evidence that the prosecution previously tried to introduce under New York's Molyneux rule. On Friday morning, the prosecution argued, and Judge Gaffey agreed, that this set of text messages could come in, with redactions. The underlying reasoning or argument was that Priya's line of questioning in regards to Grace Jabbari telling others that she didn't know how she got her injuries on March 25th were meant to impugn Jabbari's credibility, despite there being an alternative explanation for why Grace Jabbari might make such statements to others. Here are some examples of what Grace Jabbari repeated during testimony about what she said to others. "I think I may have fainted," to a friend while at Bellevue. "I'm so confused right now. When police first ask her name, it's the very first question they ask." "Did he hurt me?" to police. Jabbari asked to not have to play this part of the body cam footage. She was teary-eyed on the stand when she had to play it. She was questioned further and confirmed that this was the first time Jonathan Majors was mentioned, that she brought him up, not police. "What happened to my ear?" to police. "I don't know how my finger got hurt," to police. Jabbari also told medics she doesn't know what movement caused her injury, after stating that she remembered feeling sick, then saw it. She testified that it referred to her own vomit on the sheets in the bed. She also repeated to the medics that she doesn't know what happened to her finger. Additionally, on Thursday, Priya Chaudry questioned Grace Jabbari about inconsistent statements, one being on a domestic incident report that she took at the hospital and that the police officer filled out. At first, Grace Jabbari said she didn't know, but then Chaudry showed Jabbari her signature on both of the forms, and Jabbari confirmed that it was her signatures. It's probably worth noting that on redirect, the prosecution did ask a question to elicit testimony from Grace that she doesn't understand legalese, despite having parents and a sister who are practicing attorneys and being prepped by the prosecution. It's unclear if that portion of redirect refers to this portion of questioning from Chaudry regarding the signature on inconsistent statements about different injuries alleged and the causes of those injuries. And Jabbari told the prosecution, "I freaked out, like a blip," as in a lapse in time and memory, and said, "I don't recall." At this point, when she's talking to the prosecution about the causes of the injuries she has, Jonathan Majors has already been arrested, and she's not anywhere near his presence to fear telling the full story if she can remember it. The reason the texts were introduced was to demonstrate this alternative explanation, that Grace Jabbari was afraid to tell anybody because she was afraid of the consequences, namely that Jonathan Majors would kill himself. The text messages were not introduced to demonstrate a past act of DV, and I'll describe in a minute how if Majors did commit DV on this occasion, where the text messages are from, it conflicts with Jabbari's own testimony about events and testimony in general, and also does not fit the prosecution's theory of the case and opening statements. So now let's talk about the line of questioning. In other words, how did this play out in the courtroom on Friday during redirect? Well, the texts are shown on screen with redactions visible. So imagine just like an image of text messages and replies back and forth with different lines or blocks of text blacked out so they're not visible. It's unclear whether or not the courtroom is made aware that these text messages are from the same September 2022 event that Jabbari had already testified to. You know, the one with the pub friend coming home one night with Jabbari, the headphones, and the Coretta Scott King. It was an argument that extended more than 24 hours. But at some point, this is where this text message exchange actually happens, and we're not sure if that context is apparent to the courtroom while this redirect questioning is happening. The prosecutors asked Jabbari if Majors had ever attempted to stop her from going to the hospital. Jabbari answers yes, and prosecutors then display to the jury the text message conversation that we're all talking about now. So Jabbari is asked to read the text aloud. Jabbari begins reading the text messages, but then she starts to cry, and for what it's worth, this is not the only time she started crying during testimony. Some other examples were when she was about to watch the body cam footage and had to continue right before she was asked if she was the first person to mention Majors' names, which is important to note because that's part of why this was introduced, to demonstrate that Jabbari was afraid to tell someone that Jonathan Majors may do things to her. And there were several other occasions. You can look at some of the other people talking about this case or some of my videos if you want to hear about those occasions where she began crying on the stand and sometimes even had to run out of the courtroom. ADA Kelly Galloway takes over to finish reading through these text messages, and just to emphasize, the redacted portions are, as expected, not read aloud. Galloway does not ask Jabbari if, who, how, what, anything that relates to what the underlying context behind bumped my head should be. That means we have no testimony on if there even was an injury, as opposed to maybe a headache from arguing, extensive arguing, or a hangover, or a combination of both, or how it would have been caused. The prosecution moves on to ask Jabbari if she knew who caused her injuries on March 25th, and Jabbari answers, Jonathan Majors. Redirect ends. It was notably short. These text messages are introduced, they're read out loud, and then Grace Jabbari is asked, who injured you on March 25th, Jonathan Majors, even though those text messages aren't about March 25th. And there were no questions about an injury at the time of these text messages. So I think that's pretty interesting, the order of the line of questioning, but that's just me. Now let's dive into prior testimony and opening statements and how they relate to this set of text messages that came in on Friday. On Tuesday, Jabbari had testified that Jonathan Majors had not been physical with her before.
Didn't she testify that he has not been physically abusive to me throughout the whole relationship? So
He sure did. So if you're bringing out
Right.
these text messages, to me, that seems like perjury.
Right.
Yep.
So my question now is, what is this article talking about? Because this article right here says Jonathan Majors begged accuser to avoid hospital warning of possible investigation. But again, she testified. She testified from day one he has not been physically abused. So
Right.
why are we seeing these kind of headlines going on? Please, could you please help me out here?
In opening statements on Monday, the prosecution argued that Majors was emotionally and psychologically abusive throughout their 2-year relationship, and that the relationship culminated in an instance of physical assault finally on March 25th. It's worth noting that during opening statements, the defense objected when ADA Michael Perez said, pattern of abuse. Both sides had to approach the bench. And lastly, in regards to prior testimony, Jabbari delivered testimony on the argument that these text messages are from. So there's different bits of testimony on this September 2022 argument, which extended more than one day on both direct and cross-examination. Now, this was the pub friend, headphone, Coretta Scott incident. And consistent with the general testimony and the opening statements, it's not alleged during the testimony about this incident that spanned, this argument that spanned several days, couple days, that Jonathan Majors committed an EDV. Now let's talk about the media having its cake and eating it too. First, back in October, the media let news of some London incident in September 2022 that was being filed as part of a Molyneux packet appear to involve some unnamed person that may or may not be Grace Jabbari. This opened the doorway to some interpretation that there might be another accuser or alleged victim to back up Grace Jabbari's experience and establish a pattern of behavior against Jonathan Majors in the court of public opinion. So here we see from Daily Beast on October 25th, well, actually published October 24th and updated on October 25th, that in the prosecution's response to the motion to dismiss, the DA has revealed it obtained a London Metropolitan Police report about a September 2022 incident that is relevant to their case against the actor. Prosecutors say that they have obtained medical records and treatment information for a woman connected to the incident, but they did not provide further details on what happened or who was involved. And as part of that motion and regarding this London September 2022 medical evidence, people have made diligent good faith efforts to obtain medical records from London related to an incident that occurred in September 2022. These medical records are not in the people's custody and control and are related to a Molyneux incident, the motion states. People have made diligent good faith efforts to obtain medical records related to subsequent treatment obtained in the United Kingdom. And secondly, the media is allowing these text messages to appear out of context, while obviously acknowledging that it involves Jabbari. It's leaving the door open to interpretation as if there's another incident where he got physically violent with her besides March 25th. And it's an additional incident in relation to the incident she may have testified to in trial, but that's simply not the case. Out of all the major outlets, including People magazine that I read, the only major outlet I saw specify that these text messages were from this September 22 pub friend, phone, and Coretta Scott King incident was the Rolling Stone with Cheyenne Roundtree writing. And to be clear, the Rolling Stone states that not only does this relate to the argument, so the messages correspond to Jabbari's earlier testimony about a prolonged incident in September 2022, which was tied to Majors becoming upset that Jabbari had gone to a pub with a friend in London. Majors allegedly confronted Jabbari, stomped on her earphones, and told her she was stupid if she didn't know what she had done, Jabbari testified. Majors allegedly then attempted to kick Jabbari out of the house they shared, running up the stairs to throw her belongings and bags in the trash, as well as hurling and breaking objects in close proximity to Jabbari. In the continued aftermath of the fight, Majors was heard on a voice recording yelling "How dare you" at Jabbari and saying he was a great man and he needed a great woman, adding that he expected Jabbari to hold herself to the standards of Michelle Obama and Coretta Scott King. In the aftermath, Majors allegedly threatened Jabbari that he was considering killing himself in response to her discussing going to the hospital, according to messages shown in court. "I need love too," he wrote, "or maybe I'm such a monster and horrible man I don't deserve it and I should just kill myself. In this way, my existence is miserable, I want to die." Now, just to be clear, this text message here doesn't follow the suggestion that Majors is threatening to kill himself in direct response to her discussing going to the hospital. He opens this with "I need love too," which doesn't seem that relevant to someone saying they need to go to the hospital, but you're open to interpret that differently. To address why didn't the defense clean it up? It might have become imperative for the defense to do some recross if the prosecution had asked, what injury did you have? How was it caused? And, there was testimony at all that Jonathan Majors had inflicted this injury to her. But instead, they only asked Jabbari if Jonathan Majors had asked her not to seek treatment before, and then who caused her injuries on March 25th, 2023. And then there's two kickers here. So again, it's unclear to the jury if it's apparent when exactly these text messages are from, because they're shown these text messages and then they jump to a question about March 25th injuries. And they've previously heard that there was no DV committed in the September 2022 prolonged argument. So logic might lead them to infer that there's a whole nother incident where DV occurred that wasn't testified to, but they could possibly draw that conclusion without this being contextualized with prior testimony. And the second kicker is a major inconsistency in the theory of the case. On one hand, pattern of abuse, but this is from one incident where it was testified to that there was no physical abuse. And two, the whole logic that this is admitted as an alternative explanation as to why Grace Jabbari did not want to tell people on March 25th how she got her injuries, why she kept saying, I don't know what I did to my ear, I don't know what happened to my finger, I don't know why my head hurts so bad. If this is introduced to suggest an alternative explanation as to why those statements shouldn't make the jury question Grace Jabbari's credibility, and that alternative explanation is that she was afraid to seek treatment because he always told her, if you go do something, I'm going to kill myself. So this is the only example the prosecution is using to demonstrate a pattern of Jonathan Majors threatening suicide. But on September 2022, she does go get treatment. And as she said in the text message, she wanted to seek medical treatment because she was having trouble sleeping and wanted a stronger painkiller. And Jonathan Majors didn't kill himself, nor did he end the relationship. In fact, one could argue that he was trying to end the relationship when he told her to get out and was throwing her clothes and putting them in bags, but that after she went to get medical treatment, he changed his mind on ending the relationship. And we don't get any testimony about any of that. All we have is testimony that he had not committed DV before March 25th, and in testimony regarding September 2022, no DV was alleged there either, which is consistent with the general testimony. There are some other interesting things to note about this text message reveal, namely that everything discussed in the prosecution's opening statements and alleged during Grace's direct testimony as far as a pattern of psychological and emotional abuse, that he would call her a monster, threaten suicide if she tried to leave, that's all pinpointed in this one text message example. So we have one example, not a pattern established. And lastly, going back to Grace Jabbari's own testimony about this fight that started and lasted a couple days after Grace Jabbari returned home from a friend, when asked by the defense if she was drunk this night, she corrected the language and said she was just tipsy. But we've also seen this kind of couching and walk-back language multiple other times throughout her testimony. One major example is, despite the jury being able to see footage after footage, minutes of Grace Jabbari running as Jonathan Majors was running to get away from her, she's asked repeatedly if, are you running after him? Are you chasing him? And she would correct it by saying she was just walking or following him. So the only testimony we have about this September 2022 incident at all is only from Jabbari. And wanting to make sure that it's characterized as just being tipsy rather than being drunk could be an accurate assessment, or it could be an attempt to downplay what really happened from someone besides Jabbari's own perspective on the night that this fight all started. And, on March 25th, she had said that I started the fight because I tried to take your phone, which turns out to be exactly true, and she testified to that in court. So if we see her say in a text message, I will tell them I bumped my head, we've already seen her say, I told them. And what followed it was not untrue or a lie or something she was making up. It was something actually reflective of the situation that occurred. However, she only says these things in text to Majors. We end up finding out in other ways that, at least for March 25th, that's not what she ended up telling to the police officers and others. And one more piece of this is that the jury was told not to consider certain parts of testimony about these events, including the September 2022 event, as evidence in and of themselves. So interesting that we now have an exhibit admitted from something with testimony that they were told not to consider as evidence. Not sure how that works. And again, I'm not sure if the jury understands that those text messages are from one of those events that was already testified to. Keep all of that in mind. Okay, and one more last thing, because I realized that it's something that didn't seem to have been questioned while Jabbari was being questioned about the body-worn cam footage, and I realized it while catching a recap with Chillmonger and Danny live talking about what she observed in the courtroom.
She did, in fact, try to grab Mr. Major's phone, which she just did on the stand today. But she did not admit to slapping, cutting, attacking, or chasing him. What?
No, she did admit to chasing him because we saw it.
Well, according to the body-worn camera, she did not admit to that. And yeah, as the driver witnesses and Mr. Major's photographed injuries and torn clothes prove, it's important to note Majors told the police that Steph slapped him and tore his coat, yet the police did not ask Stephanie about this at all, in clear violation of domestic violence investigation protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, definitely worth highlighting here that during Officer Swain's testimony, as highlighted by Danny, that when asked about Jonathan's torn coat, Swain responds, "I didn't see it." But later on during his testimony, the video is played back showing Jonathan leaning on the bedroom dresser pointing to his jacket. Now, maybe that stuff wasn't actually on the body-worn camera, but everything else that was reported has seemed to have been consistent in that letter. Or there was an agreement that that part of the body cam footage couldn't be questioned about, and obviously the audio wasn't playing out loud to the courtroom. So, just some additional food for thought. But what do you think? That's probably a lot to unravel, and it probably unravels differently in the context of the courtroom, and then in the court of public opinion, and then in the reality of what happened in that moment between Jabbari and Jonathan Majors. Or, I guess when I say in that moment, I mean 2 or 3 days worth of arguing back and forth. But in any case, I hope this video offered insight and food for thought on a topic that's been highly buzzed about. Take care.